What if you could cut your pre-construction timelines in half? If you're a custom builder, remodeler, or commercial general contractor, and you feel like pre-construction, design, estimating, selections is just taking way too long. If designs are taking forever, if you're frustrated waiting for third-party architects, if selections get stalled out, projects are just taking too long to get to the starting line, then this episode is for you. My name is Todd Dawalt. This is the Construction Leading Edge podcast from constructionleadingedge.com. And today I'm going to show you exactly how to streamline your pre-construction process so you can move faster, keep your clients engaged, get your projects started on time, and take control of your schedule, and maybe even take control of your business. So let me ask you a few questions. Does it feel like your projects get bogged down in pre-construction? Does it take forever just to get through the design phase? Do selections drag out for weeks or months? Maybe you start the process off strong, but then it feels like the wheels fall off a few weeks in. Clients get decision fatigue. Clients go for a couple of weeks without making decisions. It seems like nothing's happening on projects for weeks at a time in the pre-construction phase. Wondering, how do you manage third-party consultants like architects, engineers, and interior designers who don't work for you? Maybe you're thinking, I don't have any control over clients because they're writing me the check. Maybe that sounds familiar. Well, here's what happens when pre-construction drags. When projects get stalled out in pre-construction, your projects slide into the next quarter, maybe even the next year. That revenue that you were hoping to get in the second or third quarter slides by a quarter or a year. Meanwhile, your overhead meter keeps running. That project you were planning on starting, you had staffing lined up for it, and you were planning on that revenue, it slides by months, maybe even longer. Clients start to lose that love and feeling during pre-construction. Decision fatigue sets in. They don't make decisions, or they second-guess decisions, or they change their mind constantly. Just feels like a never-ending process. And some projects, they just stall out completely. They die on the vine during pre-construction, and they just never come back. And worst of all, now you feel dependent on outside architects and designers who don't work for you. So your schedule and your revenue, maybe even to some extent your business, feels like it's out of your control. Maybe you feel like other people are in control of your business. You don't feel like you have the steering wheel of your business in your hands. And that one project that got bogged down, but then it finally gets traction. Now it's coming online when you have a couple of other projects planned and you have overlap and you have this compression in your schedule. Your team maybe gets maxed out. You're trying to either get a couple of projects started or trying to close out too many projects at one time. Even though your team is working hard, putting the hours in, doing the best they can, you're frustrated. You're frustrated, and sometimes you take it out on your team. But the problem isn't them, right? Think about this. What if, this may sound crazy, but what if you could cut your pre-construction timelines in half and start projects when you want them to? What if you could actually set a start date on a project that has a complicated design and pre-construction process, but you could actually set a start date and hit it? Imagine if your clients stay engaged through the pre-construction process, excited, confident, and they are trusting you. You're operating at a high trust level during pre-construction, and they're decisive. And imagine that these outside designers, architects, engineers, consultants who don't work for you are playing ball, and they are hitting deadlines and doing what needs to be done, and you feel like you're in control of the process. And then think about what that does to your ability to sell. Your pipeline is flowing smoothly. You know you're starting projects on time, so you can go sign pre-construction agreements, you can sell projects, make plans for staffing because you know when projects are going to start, you know when projects are going to wrap up. You're not so reactive. You're not constantly playing catch up. And this is completely possible. And it starts with how you think about your pre-construction process. And I've said this a lot, but it's worth restating. The pre-construction process is the secret profit phase of every project. It's where your profits are made or lost. It's where schedules are made or lost. I've spent the past 25, nearly 30 years managing projects as a general contractor, as a business owner, as an owner's rep, and most projects slide during pre-construction. That's what we want to talk about. So in a previous life, I spent 8 or 10 years living almost completely in pre-construction. I managed projects for clients like Procter and Gamble in the Cincinnati area. I managed projects at Procter and Gamble's headquarters in downtown Cincinnati, multiple locations around Cincinnati, Arkansas, Toronto. I've managed projects for utility companies like Duke Energy, a senior living community that was about $110 million in total cost, office buildings, industrial buildings, college libraries, lots of projects. So all in, I've managed over $300 million worth of construction projects. And a lot of that was focused on pre-construction. My job was to push projects through pre-construction as quickly as possible and get them launched. So when you work for a real estate developer, the goal is to get projects finished as quickly as possible. There is a pro forma there, especially when you're building a $30 million office building. There's a lease. There's a move-in date that has to be hit, and there are incredible carry costs. Imagine what the construction loan is for a $30 million project. So there's a lot of urgency to get projects finished, which means there's a lot of urgency to get projects started, which means there's a lot of urgency to get projects pushed through pre-construction. And I'm talking about pushing projects through floodplain, getting them removed from the floodplain, working with local municipalities, utility companies, sewer districts, transportation departments, permitting, development, entitlements, zoning changes, very complicated things on very large projects. So I had to manage multiple clients within the same project. Many times we would be working with the CEO on, say, a project for Procter and Gamble or Valvoline. There would be department heads, there would be user groups, working with people from the CEO all the way down to admins about their specific space and their space needs, managing permitting agencies like metropolitan sewer districts. Had to get a project through the FAA, third-party consultants, architects, engineers, geotech consultants, furniture suppliers, branding consultants, and here are 6 strategies that I've developed over that time that you can use to cut pre-construction timelines in half. Plus, there's a bonus accelerator if you manage a team. I'll talk about that. So let's jump into it. Here's what happens. Most contractors, custom builders, remodelers, commercial GCs, trade contractors rush into a project without a plan. And then they wonder why everything takes so long. They're like, we got to get started. We have to hurry up on the front end. And the faster we go on the front end, the faster we're going to get finished. Well, that is completely backwards. The first thing you need to do is go slow in the beginning. Resist the urge to go fast in the beginning. You go slow in the beginning, you'll finish faster. There's this old Beach Boys song called Kokomo, and it says something like, you'll get there faster if you take it slow. And what most people do is they fall into when it comes to getting a project started in pre-construction, they fall right into the just enough to start trap, the Jets trap. They do just enough to get started, and they start off rushing into the project, and it is chaos from the jump. So here's the thing. Successful projects get built twice, once on paper and then once in real life. It's the same thing for pushing a project through pre-construction. So you need to lay out how the project is going to move from day one, whatever the beginning is, all the way through the end result, whether that's handoff to construction, getting a signed contract, getting a building permit, whatever that might be. So what you need to do, step number 1, is to create a work plan tracker, okay? A work plan tracker. This is a detailed breakdown that maps out the entire process, every step that needs to be taken, every decision that needs to be made, every approval, every selection. And then you have that all built out. You put target dates for that. You break it into phases with milestones and clearly define who owns what and have some way to track the progress. This is going to be your single source of truth for this project. Sort of like a project schedule. But what I found is just to have a spreadsheet that has the task, the milestone, target date, who's responsible for it, status, notes. This is going to be your single source of truth. This way, everybody knows where the project stands and what's next. You never have to wonder, hey, what are we doing? Who's responsible for this? What's the status of this step? This becomes a living, breathing, working document that everybody on the team works from. So, step one is to create a work plan tracker that has every step that needs to be made and broken down into phases with milestones. Step number two is well, this is something very few people do. People are afraid of this step. But step two, strategy number two, is to set expectations with clients and with the team. Right? Most chaos comes from a clear, unspoken expectation. And I heard this statement years ago and it stuck with me. Unclear expectations are premeditated resentments. Unclear expectations are premeditated resentments. If you are going into a process and you have expectations about what the client or the architect or your team are going to do, but you haven't been clear with that, you are basically saying, I'm going to be pissed off at some point, disappointed, and resent these other people because they're not meeting my expectations. But it's your fault because you didn't tell them. So you need to set the tone early, anchor the team, anchor your client, anchor the third party consultants to the expectation. Here's the process. Here's our plan. Here's how we're going to do this. Here's what we need from you. And here's what you can expect from us. Most people are afraid to do that because it feels confrontational. And we're like, how can I possibly tell the client what to do? They're spending millions of dollars with us. And how can I tell this hotshot architect who wears funny hats and weird glasses out to the meetings? How can I tell them what to do? Well, it's your job to lead this project. Somebody's going to lead the project. I say it might as well be you. You have the most to gain or lose, right? You're taking the most risk, might as well be used. So set expectations with the clients and the team. Let them know what the pre-construction process is going to look like from day one, what the expectations are for how this thing is going to go. Right? That's strategy number two. Be very clear about your expectations up front. Strategy number three is you may be wondering, well, how do I get people who don't work for me to do stuff? I learned a valuable lesson. So here's how I used to do it. I managed projects for a long time. And when I was a project manager for a commercial GC, and even when I had my own business, here's how I would do things. I would go into my office, lock the door, pull up Microsoft Project, create a project schedule, create the deadlines, and then I would go to my team, my subcontractors, and then hand them the schedule as if it were chiseled on tablets of stone, that it came from the mountain on high. And I would say, here's your schedule. Go make it happen. And then I would be frustrated because they would push back and they would get irritated and like find excuses why things wouldn't work. I'm like, this is a perfect plan. What's wrong with you? And then I learned a valuable lesson one day. This was in 2015. So I was managing a development, working for a real estate developer, building it was about an $18 million industrial building, 600,000 square foot building with several acres of parking, hundreds of parking spaces. And the issue was, it was around, say, October. And this was in Louisville, Kentucky. And there was this problem in the parking lot. There was a big section of the parking lot that had unsuitable materials. And the general contractor and the earthwork excavation contractor kept like undercutting stuff, and they would fill it in with stone, and then it would rain, and then they would have to dig it out again. And this problem, we had this entire section of parking lot that had 100 parking spaces worth of parking lot that wasn't going to be ready for pavement, and it just kept getting worse. And in this part of the country, asphalt plants close in late December, generally around Christmas. So we'd been screwing around with this and kept notifying the GC, hey, this is a problem. What's the plan? And they would throw things back over the wall to us with one of my least favorite comments, like, here's the issue, please advise, like it was our problem. So the issue was, winter was coming. Asphalt plants are going to close. We have about 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks before asphalt plants close. And we got about 6 or 8 weeks of work that has to be done, and there's no plan. So here's what I did. I said, all right, commanding people what to do, giving them directives wasn't working. I was the owner's rep. I told the GC, get all of the players involved, bring them to the job site. Trailer, we're going to have to figure this out. So I walked into this trailer, and body language was super negative, lots of crossed arms and glaring at me like I was going to come in here and yell at these guys. And I took a different approach. Here's my approach. I said, look, guys, here's the situation. Here's what's going to happen. If we don't get this solved, we're not going to get this parking lot paved. And if we don't get this parking lot paved, the tenant is not going to be able to move in the spring. And if that doesn't happen, we're going to get hammered with liquidated damages and it's all going to flow downhill and we're going to have a giant mess. So we need to figure this out. Let's figure this out together. I need your help to figure this out. So instead of telling people what to do, I started asking for commitments. And that's the strategy. Ask for commitments. Instead of telling people deadlines, ask commitments. So what I would do is say, all right, here's the first step. We need to get the curb and gutter guy in here by this date. What would it take to do excavation contract? What would it take for you to do that? Well, I would need this to happen. I would need the concrete guy to get this done. Okay, concrete guy, what would it take for you to be able to do that? Well, I would need this to happen. Okay, general contractor, what would it take for him to do that? Yeah, we can make that happen. So we spent 2 hours negotiating with each other, asking for commitments. And we walked out of that room with a plan and a list of commitments that each trade had made. They would say, if you can do this, I'll do this by this date. And it had to work perfectly. And I had very little confidence that it was going to work. And I'll be damned if it didn't work perfectly. We got that parking lot paved. They worked overtime 6-7 days a week. The parking lot was paved before asphalt plants closed, a couple of days before Christmas. Client moved in, tenant moved in, everybody was happy. And the only way it worked was because I stopped making demands and I asked for commitments. So that's the third strategy, is ask for commitments from third-party architects, engineers, designers, even the client. So what this looks like is what asking for commitments looks like. Let's say you're working with an architect who doesn't work for you. You would say, all right, Mr. Architect or Mrs. Architect, our permit submission date is April 1. When we work backwards from that, it looks like we need to have the schematic design, the SD level drawings done by January 15th. Today's January 1st. What would it take for you to have that done by January 15th? And they might say, no problem, I can do that by January 15th. Or they'll say, it's not going to happen. And you would say, okay, when can you have it done? Or better yet, what would it take? What can we move around? What can we help you with to make January 15th a date? If you're working with an interior designer, you would say, look, here's our plan. Here's what we're trying to accomplish. Can you commit to having these selections to us by March 1st? Or what would it take for you to do that? I like the question, what would it take to make this date happen? What I don't like to ask is, well, why can't you get us your SD level drawings by January 15th? When you ask, why can't you, you're asking for reasons it won't work. So eliminate why can't you from your vocabulary and ask, what would it take to make this happen by this date? And then just ask, what would it take? There may be some assumptions they're making, some priorities that need to be shifted around. I even did this with a permitting agency, the Louisville Metropolitan Sewer District. On a different project, we were going to build a 640,000 square foot industrial building. It was in the floodplain. There were a lot of moving parts and pieces, and we had to have some level of approval from the MSD before we could start clearing and excavation. So I asked for a meeting with them. They didn't have to take this meeting. I met with a few of the plan reviewers from MSD and I said, look, here's what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to get clearing and excavation started in the fall because our target date is we need to be complete 12 to 15 months later, whatever the date was. And I asked, what would it take for us to be able to start clearing on this date? And they said, well, we could probably approve that as long as you make this happen. Like, okay, great. So I just bought like 3 or 4 weeks for clearing. And then I said, what would it take for us to be able to start some grading, some mass excavation over in this part of the project? And we negotiated and we were able to start clearing and excavation a month early, which is a big deal because this was in like September, October timeframe. So give people a target date, ask what would it take, and then ask for a commitment. So what I did with Louisville MSD was I said, okay, if we can get this application and full set of plans into you by this date, what would it take for you to give us an approval by this date? And that puts people into problem-solving mode. Then once you get those commitments, you turn those into deadlines, and then you preach those deadlines. So ask for commitments, turn them into deadlines. That's the third strategy. The fourth strategy is to think in sprints, okay? Think in sprints. I'll borrow a strategy that I've used. This came from software development. There's this concept called Scrum, or maybe it's Agile project management, but it's called Scrum. And here's how it works. Teams work in short, focused bursts called sprints. driving toward a specific milestone. And in software development, they're driving toward, okay, we have to have this feature done in 1 week or 2 weeks. And they sprint toward that milestone, they get that feature done, then they move to the next thing and they sprint toward the next thing. And you could do the same thing with your pre-construction process. Here's how you would do that. Start by defining the desired outcome for the entire project. Set a desired target date for finishing pre-construction, whether that's construction documents complete, signed contract, permit application submitted, whatever that is. And then you work backwards and you break it into phases, and then you establish a desired outcome for the phase. Here's what this might look like. Example, you might say, let's say it's January 1st, and you would say, we need a permit set of drawings ready by April 1. So you have 90 days. You would break that into 3 phases: schematic, design development, and then construction documents. You would say, all right, we have SD drawings, DD drawings, and then our CDs that we'll submit for permit application. And then you would break it into phases and then treat each phase like a sprint. So the first sprint would be SD drawings. You would say, we're going to sprint toward SD drawings by a certain date. And this is all we're going to focus on, is pushing toward SD drawings by a certain date. So example, it's January 1st. Your goal is to have permit ready drawings by, let's say your target, what you really need is July 1st. What you really need, like the realistic, what you're used to, is July 1st, 6 months to get through design and selections and be ready to submit a permit, right? So what you do is internally, you set a target date of April 1st, because we're going to cut pre-construction timelines in half, right? So let's set a really aggressive date of April 1st. That may sound crazy. Like, how can you possibly cut pre-construction timelines in half? But think about it. During the design phase, during pre-construction, it's not like construction. It's not like there's activity going on 4 or 5 days a week. During the pre-construction phase, if let's say you had a chart that showed daily activity during pre-construction phase, if you were to look at a typical week, how much activity is actually happening on a project during pre-construction? Right. During the design phase, there's just not much going on. It's not like somebody's working on this for 40 hours a week. What happens a lot of times is somebody will work a few hours on something, and then they'll send it to the next person for review, and it will sit in their email box or sit on their desk, figuratively or literally, waiting, and nothing's happening. And then that person opens it up. They spend a couple of hours looking at it, maybe, and then they send it on to the next person for review or approval. And then it sits in their box for days and nothing's happening. So over a 40-hour week, maybe there's 6 hours of activity at the most. So most of the time during pre-construction, there's nothing going on. So what we want to do is compress the time frame, because the reason nothing's going on is because people are like, well, I don't really need to do this until the deadline. So they don't. There's this thing called Parkinson's law that says tasks expand in duration to fill the time allotted to them. Tasks expand in duration to fill the time allotted to them. You know this. If you have a deadline to do something and it's 2 weeks away, you're not going to do anything today. You're going to do something just before the deadline. And that's how most people are. So what we want to do is set deadlines and compress that and squeeze out all of those empty time slots where nothing's happening to drive pre-construction. So your goal would be to have permit application drawings July 1st. You're going to set a target of April 1st. We're going to cut it in half. Then you would break that down and say, all right, it's January 1st. It probably takes about 2 weeks to get SD drawings. So you would say January 15th, we have SD drawings. February 15th, our DD drawings are done. CDs are done March 15th. You ask the architect, hey, what would it take for you to hit these dates? SD by January 15th, DDs by 2/15, CDs by 3/15. What would it take for you to do that? And you ask them to commit to that date. And you negotiate a little bit. You ask for the commitment. Then you lock in that deadline. And then you sprint toward the January 15th date. And that's what you focus on. And then you sprint toward the DD level drawings on February 15th. That's what you focus on. Work in sprints. Focus on those, breaking it down into bite-sized portions. Okay. And then the next strategy, number 5, is use meetings to drive the schedule. Use meetings to drive the schedule. The architect just committed and they said, yeah, I can hit those dates. January 15th, I can have SD drawings done, DDs by February 15th, CDs by March 15th. So what you do is you go ahead and schedule review meetings. Put it on the calendar. January 15th, we'll have a review meeting to go over the SD level drawings. Set a meeting for February 15th. Put it on the date weeks or months in advance. What a lot of people do is they'll say, all right, well, do the best you can. Send me your drawings, then we'll review it. And then we'll try to get something on the calendar, and you have to wait a few days or weeks because of vacations and schedules. No, don't do that. Once you get the commitment, turn that into a deadline and then turn that into a meeting. This works for third-party consultants. This works for your team. This may even work for you, because there are very few better ways to create urgency and accountability than to have a meeting, because nobody wants to show up for a meeting that they committed to and not be done. So create urgency, create the accountability by using meetings to drive the schedule. So you would have a sprint, a 1 or 2 week sprint, schedule a meeting at the end of that sprint that says, we're going to be done with this phase. We're going to review this on this date, and then schedule the next meeting. You don't have to schedule one meeting at a time. You can schedule all of the meetings at once. So use meetings to drive the schedule. Strategy number 6, send out weekly update emails. Every Friday afternoon, send out a brief email that has these standard sections in it. Here's what was done this week. Here's the plan for next week. Here's what we need from you. Here's the information we need from the client, from the architect. These are the open issues. This is what we need from each person. You may include a list of open issues and then upcoming deadlines that you're shooting for, including meetings. You ask for the commitments, you've turned them into deadlines, you've scheduled them as meetings, and you're going to keep preaching these deadlines and these meetings in your weekly updates. And an interesting thing happens when people see a deadline a few times. It becomes ingrained in their brain and it gets locked in. And sending this weekly update makes it really simple for somebody on the team to answer the 2 questions that they have. What do I got to do? And when do I got to do it? Okay, so you're pushing this information out to them. This keeps the client engaged, builds trust, shows that you're providing leadership for the project, and holds everybody accountable without having to chase them down. So those are the 6 strategies you can use that I've used to cut pre-construction timelines in half. So number 1, create a work plan tracker. Number 2, set expectations, very clear expectations with everybody up front. Ask for commitments and then turn those into deadlines. Number 4 is think in sprints. Number 5, use meetings to drive the schedule. And number 6, send out weekly update emails every week, even if nothing has happened. Send out a weekly update. Here's the bonus accelerator. All right, if you run a team, if you have designers, selections coordinators, estimators on your team that you're managing, and you want to drive pre-construction, have a daily huddle every morning. 30-minute daily huddle. Pull up the work plan tracker for each project, identify the blockers, keep the sprint on track, keep it in front of people. Here's what the agenda for that huddle looks like. All right, here's the work plan tracker. Here's our next deadline. We have this next meeting. Here's what we need to deliver for the next meeting. Where are we? And what do you need help with? You would say this to your team. All right, we have to have these selections made by this point. Where are we? What do you need help with? All right, we have to have the estimate pushed to a certain point and have 80% numbers. Where are we at? What do you need help with? We need to get selections made. We need to have the design. Where are we? What do you need help with? And then train your team to bring their questions to these daily huddles. If they have questions during the day, they capture those questions, they bring them to the daily huddle. Then you can answer those questions. That way, they can work most of the day on a few important things and not have to spend time working through something saying, oh, there's a question. I should go ask somebody. Now I have to wait. So have them train your team to think, all right, what am I going to need to get my job done today? What questions do I have? And proactively bring those questions to the daily huddle. That way, if you're leading that team, you can work on your stuff. Your team can stay focused on what they're sprinting toward, and everybody can be much more efficient. Okay, so that's a bonus. And not sure you can do that with third-party architects, but you can definitely do those weekly coordination meetings with third-party architects. Now, there's one thing that all of this depends on. Like there's this cornerstone. If there's a stone arch, there's a keystone. And if the keystone is missing, then everything just falls apart. So there's a keystone that all of these strategies depend on. And without it, it doesn't work. And that one thing is you have to have a documented pre-construction process. You have to have a pre-construction playbook that has step-by-step instructions. This is how we push projects through pre-construction. If pre-construction is different every time, then your team is guessing, things slipping through the cracks, duplicate effort. There's nothing to base this work plan tracker on. Your clients will feel it. Your team will feel it. You'll still be answering lots of questions. So all of this depends on having a documented pre-construction process. That is the keystone. So if you're tired of pre-construction dragging out, tired of the things we talked about, of projects slipping into the next quarter or dying on the vine, then we can help. And the way we can help you is to get you into our Systematize Your Construction Business program. Inside SYCB, as we call it, we will help you build a pre-construction playbook with clear step-by-step instructions for how your projects should move through pre-construction, through design, selections, estimating, permitting, the whole process. And inside our program, you'll get access to AI-powered tools that will do most of the heavy lifting for you when it comes to creating these SOPs. And more importantly, you'll get the accountability that you need to finally get this nailed down. All right, there's plenty of information out there, but the key to implementation is accountability. And that's what we'll provide with our coaches, is the accountability you need to finally get this done. And most of our contractors, custom home builders, remodelers, commercial GCs, even trade contractors like roofers, electricians, plumbers, concrete companies, they start seeing results in the first 30 days. So that's you. If you know you need to get a pre-construction playbook dialed in and you need our help, go to constructionleadingedge.com/apply and take the first step, which is to schedule a free business evaluation call with my team. The link's also in the show notes. You can just open up the show notes or the description. If you're watching this on YouTube, click the link in there. That'll take you there. It'll ask you answer a couple of questions and then take you to a calendar page where you can book a call if spots are available. There you go. Thanks for listening. If you get value out of this podcast, do me a favor, leave a rating and or a review and subscribe to the podcast for more stuff like this. My name is Todd Dawalt from here at constructionleadingedge.com. I'll see you next time.